On May the 16th, 1943, Avro Lancaster bombers from 617 Squadron of the RAF made a daring nighttime raid on the dams in the Ruhr Valley in Germany. The raid was one of the high-profile events of the Second World War. The iconic Lancaster, which stands alongside the Spitfire and the Hurricane in the hearts and minds of the British people, made a real impact on the outcome of the war. It was built by the Armstrong-Whitworth Aircraft Company in Coventry. By 1942, when the first Lancaster rolled off the production line, Coventry's aviation industry was already well established. In the last years of the 19th century, an aviation pioneer, Percy Pilcher, developed a powered aircraft that could well have beaten the Wright brothers into the air by 4 years. He was about to make his first flight in 1899 when engine failure forced a delay. In order to fund the repairs, he offered a paid demonstration of an unpowered glider. Desperation drove him to proceed, despite unsuitable weather, and he crashed and died here at Stanford, near Lutterworth. Just a few years later, Morton and Weaver, later to become Coventry Victor, designed and built the first monoplane ever to fly in this country. And in 1912, in the first ever powered flight from Coventry, B.C. Hooks flew his Blériot monoplane from the local common on Allesley Old Road. It was all very exciting in these early pioneering days, but things got more serious during the First World War, when many of the Coventry motor car manufacturers began building aeroplanes and engines. Shortly after the war, in 1920, Coventry's aviation industry gained a whole new importance when the Armstrong-Whitworth Aircraft Company came into being. Former employees still speak with great affection about their time with AWA.
I feel very proud that my father was one of 22 men who started Armstrong-Whitworth in a tin shed in Puma Road. Always felt very proud of that.
I thoroughly enjoyed my apprenticeship. I thoroughly enjoyed being part of that Armstrong-Whitworth group. And I've said in later years, when I've been concerned with other industries, there was nothing quite like the aircraft industry, particularly at that time, for a bonding between people that one never really found quite in other companies.
Everybody at Baggington and Bit as well, they enjoyed their working life there, and if you meet and speak to any of them, wherever they went to, other factories, they always said that they enjoyed their life at AWA.
As soon as I got up to Baggington, I knew then that I was in my element, because it was a wonderful industry, there were wonderful people up there.
You learnt your trade, whatever it was, you learnt your trade in our day, and you started at the bottom, and they looked after you.
Coventry's aviation industry was very active during the interwar years.
So W.G. Armstrong-Whitworth, known as AWA throughout the world, were started at Whitley, and some of the early aircraft they built were an airliner, the Atlanta, and also the AW-23, which was the forerunner of the Whitley.
Making its first flight in 1936, the Armstrong-Whitley bomber, known to its pilots as the Old Faithful, was used in the first wartime operations over Germany. Activity once again intensified as World War II took hold. The de Havilland Mosquito appeared in 1941. Built from wood, it was first designed as an unarmed fast bomber and then adapted to many other uses during the war years. Around 8,000 Mosquitoes were built, about 1,100 of them by the Standard Motor Company in Coventry. 1 year later, in 1942, the Avro Lancaster was introduced. It was probably the best known of all the wartime bombers. Almost 7,400 were built, 1,500 of them by AWA. 1944 was the peak year for aircraft construction in Coventry. In that 1 year alone, 656 heavy aircraft were built.
We did long shifts. I think we started at 7:30 and we didn't finish much before about 7 o'clock, you know, at night. You worked Saturdays. And but it never seemed like work. Funny, it wasn't till on board you had a laugh.
Baginton Airport, opened by Coventry Council in 1936, played an important part during the war years for building and testing aircraft before delivery to the RAF, and later as a fighter base. It was damaged in the Luftwaffe bombing of Coventry in 1940. How different could the Second World War have been had we listened more attentively and given more support to our forward-thinking engineers, notably Sir Frank Whittle. Whittle invented the jet engine. In fact, much of his early work on jet engine design took place in Rugby and Lutterworth in the 1930s. Eric Brown, for many years chief test pilot for the Fleet Air Arm, pays tribute to Whittle's contribution to aviation.
So finally, when I came back from one of these weather checks, I saw the hangar doors open, and in there, to my astonishment, was something I'd never seen before, an airplane without propellers. And, of course, this was Britain's first jet aircraft. And the man in the uniform, the wing commander in the uniform, was Frank Whittle. And here we were on this historic occasion of the first jet flight of a British aircraft, and there didn't seem to be any official recognition of it. There wasn't even somebody taking an official camera shot of the whole situation. And I truly thought, why is all this sort of lack of enthusiasm showing? And the truth of the matter was, Frank Whittle was such a young man when he really lit on how to make a jet engine a practical proposition, that he was rather disregarded as being too young to present anything of any real significance. Little worthy to realize until this aircraft took off at Cranwell that this man was in fact an engineering genius.
A small but impressive museum in Lutterworth has an area dedicated to Whittle's achievements.
My name's Jeff Smith. I'm the curator of Lutterworth Museum. We're a small voluntary run museum in Leicestershire, birthplace of the jet engine. In 1937, Sir Frank Whittle came to Lutterworth from Rugby and stayed here developing the jet engine until 1945. We are collecting artefacts and memorabilia from the days when power jets worked in Lutterworth, as a lot of these are now being thrown away, such as the first patent for the jet engine, which was thrown into a skip in 1998.
The post-war period saw real change. The jet age had arrived. The Gloucester Meteor made its appearance in 1943. Between 1946 and 1950, the Seahawk was developed. It was the first jet fighter to be used on aircraft carriers.
This is the Seahawk. We built about 430 of those. The
Seahawk was very popular with the Fleet Air Arm. Its straight wing design gave it a low approach speed of around 110 to 115 knots, which was really important when stopping an aircraft on a wire in a very tight space. In the early 1950s, production focused on two fighters, the Gloucester Javelin and the Hawker Hunter. In November 1947, the AW-52 made its first flight. Known as the Flying Wing, it departed radically from conventional design. It was aimed at reducing drag and maximizing lift.
The Flying Wing, that was the AW-52, if I remember rightly, and there was two built. They were an experimental aircraft which finally finished up with other aircraft like the Vulcan and the Victor and such like aircraft were developed from them.
18 months later, during a test flight, things went badly wrong, and another new innovation, the ejector seat, had to be used for the first time.
I encountered a very bad oscillation in pitch, which became very, very violent. I expected the aircraft to break up. I was beginning to lose my senses, and so I decided to eject. In so doing, I believe I was the first person certainly to use the Martin Baker ejection seat, and probably the first person in this country to use it.
At about this time, air freight was becoming significant business, and AWA began the design of the Argosy 650. Only 10 civil Argosies were built, but in 1959 orders were taken for 56 Argosy 660s, the military version. This was the last major aircraft to be built in Coventry. Meanwhile, in 1952, it was found that Baginton's grass runway could only handle the older, slower aircraft, and whilst some aircraft construction continued there until 1965, the aircraft were transferred to Bitterswell for final assembly and testing. In 1965, the now famous Red Arrows were formed. Originally flying Folland Gnats, they changed to Hawks in 1979. Regular servicing was carried out at Bitterswell during the winter months.
We had the Gnats come in and converted them from ordinary Gnats to the Red Arrows, modifying them, including the famous smoke units.
Coventry Council's confidence in the future of Baginton Airport appeared to have been justified. By 2005, passenger numbers had increased to 600,000 per year. But in 2011, there are no longer any passenger services at all, and the airport is used only for cargo operations and private flying. Aircraft manufacturing peaked in Coventry at the end of the 1950s, when thousands of workers were employed. Now, in 2011, only a handful of Coventry people are employed in aviation, and the sites that were once home to aircraft manufacture have taken on new roles. What do former workers think about the decline of aviation in Coventry?
It's a terrible shame, really. A lot of these skills, well, they're there, but they've gone. The chaps can't practice the skills now, you see, and they won't come back again either.
Every street you went down in Coventry had a little factory, I suppose, component like they do now, you know, like the doorknobs or whatever it is that went on an aeroplane, or the engines. But now it's a city without a soul. They all allow allegiance to somewhere else. The skill has gone out of the city.
I enjoyed my life, and I'd go back again tomorrow if I had the chance, but it's a bit too late now.
However, the legacy of aviation in Coventry is being painstakingly preserved at the Midlands Air Museum at Baginton. Started in 1967, The museum has grown to what is now widely regarded as being amongst the top handful of air museums in the UK. Eric Brown rates it very highly.
I think this is probably, in my estimation, the third most splendid air museum in the United Kingdom. The others, of course, being the Royal Air Force and the Fleet Air Arm. But this is a wonderful museum, and it's been run so well. For example, the fact that it is open every day of the year, I think, is quite remarkable.
The museum is run by a handful of regular staff and a team of keen volunteers who work on the restoration and maintenance of old aircraft, keeping alive the skills that once were so important to the city and fostering the next generation of Coventry aviation enthusiasts.
My name is Barry James. I'm Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Midland Air Museum. The museum itself has been around for 43 years now and is one of the major independent museums in this country. It is totally self-financing and is an educational charity. It is supported by a wide range of volunteers of all ages and backgrounds. I'd like to introduce you to one of our volunteers here today, Daniel.
When I first entered the museum, I didn't know anything about aircraft. But quickly, after some helping hands from all the volunteers already here, I was reaffirmed in my convictions that I wanted to start in aircraft engineering. I'm now a licensed aircraft engineer and I can travel the world. But I'm proud to be keeping the aviation traditions alive in Coventry.
So, the story of aviation in Coventry has certainly been colourful. Groundbreaking in the early years, a major contributor to our victory in the Second World War, and instrumental in helping to shape the future of both civil and military aviation in the post-war years.